All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are so excited to have you back for Module 5 of the ELD Standards Framework Coffee Chats with our amazing guide, Lanny Simpson, taking us through it all. As people come in, I will be moving you over to be a panelist so that you can unmute yourself and also turn your cameras on if you happen to be talking. We always want to keep an eye on our bandwidth. And with no further ado, I will turn it over to Lanny.
Thank you, Ivana. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. We are about to embark on Module 5, which is number 5 out of 6 coffee chats. And we align the design of these coffee chats with the 6 modules in the WIDA e-learning portal for learning how to use the new WIDA standards and understand the framework. And so we thought it would be a good idea to be able to have fellow colleagues across the state to chat with about the new standards framework. And so today we're going to dig a little deeper and we're going to look at putting language expectations into action. I'm going to take us back for a bit of a recap, especially if you have missed the last couple of modules. During Module 3, we did a Padlet activity where we reflected on a unit that we previously taught, and we decided to see if we could identify what the overarching key language use was that was associated with our unit. And so, and in fact, before we got started, Teresa was asking me about how do you choose those key language uses? And I shared with her that it depends on the size of your unit and the number of learning activities you have. But WIDA does advise that you take a look at your summative activity or assessment and let that guide you toward what the key language use would be. And of course, you're going to be looking depending on the language of which content standards your unit is embedded in. And so we did that activity, and then in Module 4, we dug a little deeper and we actually reflected on our own unit, dug into the WIDA standards framework, and we put into practice and applied what we were learning. And so, for example, I'm going to share with you my module or my sample or model unit, and I'm going to zoom in on this and make it a little bigger. And so this was the template that you would have, and I filled it out with just simply what my unit topic was, the development of electricity through the lives of 2 inventors. This was an ESL grade 4 integrated unit with language arts. We read 2 biographies, What's the Big Idea, Ben Franklin, and an excerpt out of Who Was Thomas Alva Edison. We also learned about electrical circuits integrating science and the transfer of electricity. And we watched videos from Discovery Ed about circuits and how they worked. And then we actually built lighthouses out of 2-liter soda bottles and replete with a little flashlight battery and hearing aid, I'm sorry, yes, flashlight bulb and hearing aid batteries. And so I also included in this section the learning activities, and that helped guide me. So I knew that I was in the content areas of language arts and science. And so I looked at the most prominent key uses, and then I considered my learning activities. And so one of those learning activities was to construct an infographic on either Ben Franklin or Thomas Edison and tell about their contributions to the development of electricity. And the second big learning activity was that of building the lighthouse and learning about the transfer of electricity and being able to share with a partner how the transfer of electricity worked. And so in doing so, I identified further that my infographics would be the key language use of inform, expressive, and I knew that I wanted my students to construct informational text and language arts, and I wanted to add precision and details to define and describe their contributions. And so this is where your teacher judgment comes in of what you're wanting your students to get out. What are the goals, the learning goals associated with that activity? And then the partner activity of sharing about how the transfer of electricity works, from the battery to the bulb, and how circuits work, that came under the content area of science, of course. And so that's explaining. That one was kind of an obvious for me. And so I wanted my students to be able to describe observations and or data about a phenomenon. And so that was the sample unit. You went to your own, it forced you to make a copy of this template. And and we worked on filling it out, everything except the language features, which is what we'll do later today. But I wanted to give you some time to work on your template for going beyond the key language uses and detailing the materials and the learning activities into what language expectations would you choose, and what are the language functions associated with that particular language expectation, where you're using your teacher judgment and aligning it to what you want your students to get out of this learning activity. So this particular document, let me come out of this, and can I come out of this?
So I have been putting those links in the chat box.
Okay.
For those that aren't looking, if you happen to look in the chat box, the one that says Lanny's model unit was sent at 4:33, and there's a hyperlink there along with several other things.
Okay. And then the reflect, it's your turn, reflect on your unit. This one will cause you to make a copy of the template if you weren't with us last time, and you can start on working on your template. So it will force you to make a copy. It looks like this. Come on. And it's not making a copy for me. Don't know why. There it goes. It's just slow. So it will look like this. And I'm going to give us about, I'll check in with you after 3 minutes. Has everybody, and if you've already worked on your template, you can find it in the copy of my unit template in your own drive. I'm not sure we've got this. Does everybody have the access to their own template, or Right, it would be.
Any other links you need me to put in?
So that's the blank template that I just showed you all. That's the link to the blank template. And you may have already shared that.
I did, but I can share it again. It says link to the template for your own unit. Only click if you have not started.
Right.
So I'm putting that one in fresh.
Okay. And you can look in the Padlet. Last time we did, some of us had the time to put our link to our template into the Padlet as well.
And I'll put that Padlet link in again as well.
Okay.
All right, we got 3 minutes on the clock.
3 minutes and counting. Do we need more time? If you'll type in the chat box and respond, let me know. Okay, Susan, yes. If you finish early, you can go to the Padlet. I'm going to click on the Padlet now, and you can copy and you can edit your Padlet by clicking on the three buttons at the top. Thank you, Ivana, for putting the Padlet link in again. You click edit, and then you can actually go in and copy and paste the link to your lesson template designed for the new WIDA standards framework. And if you make it editable, I will be glad to comment and look through these. So we had some really neat units that were beginning to be developed, and the language expectations and functions had been added along with the overarching key language uses. I am hearing some feedback.
Me too, and I have muted everybody that I can mute. It almost sounds like a video playing or a
It
TV
does,
in the
doesn't it?
background. There's one participant that I cannot mute, and then there's 3 on the telephone.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's pretty faint, so we will just do the best we can. Okay. So I will give everyone 2 more minutes. We will have some more time toward the end of the presentation to work on this. Don't stress. And like I said, if you make your template editable for me, I'll be glad to go in and make comments. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and dig down even a little deeper and consider language features. And this is where we get very granular and we think about the types of sentences, clauses, phrases, and words. And in Module 5, we had Mr. Romero, our 4th grade teacher, and he wrote an exemplar or model essay about how the same theme is evidenced in 2 different stories that the class read. And the language focus function that he focused on was support opinions with reasons and information through. And so his selection of a language feature, which are the square bullets, he selected a variety of clauses to support his opinions, facts, or claims. And so what I wanted us to do is to look at how he taught the language feature to his students. And so the approach that he took was he used what he called a cookie graphic organizer, which was perfect in order to demonstrate how he introduced the quote and then how he added it and caused it to flow into the following sentence. And so he shared with his students that the center of the cookie is the actual quote he was embedding in his exemplar essay. And he shared with the class that oftentimes when you introduce a quote, you start it with the phrase to. And so he coached his students into seeing that it was to solve her problem. What did she do? And so he also added the cookie graphic organizer to what he called a language wall, which I thought was a really neat concept. We typically think of word walls and we don't think of language walls or at the middle school level or high school level, I love the expression language lockers. But at any rate, he added it to the wall after he taught it so that they could refer back to it as they constructed their own essays. And then he also added in the support of peer review so that students read each other's stories and rated their use of quotes in their writing. And so when we think about the language feature and it talks about adding adverbial clauses, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to teach your students the grammar piece of adverbial clauses. It may just be enough to say, we often start the sentence before a quote with to. And so you know your students and you know where they are in their knowledge of language and what you have taught them. So that, I think, is up to you. That you have to think about, these are fourth graders. So something to consider. Okay, now we're going to take a look at how in our module in the e-learning unit, our high school teacher, Mrs. Morrison, who's a biology teacher, how she leveraged language features to improve her students' infographics. And so they were studying about how bacteria becomes resistant to antibiotics. And she created a real world use for the infographics where they were going to post them at a local health clinic. And so she had the setting for a real audience, if you will, an authentic audience. And so this was, I think, a pretty simple one to select a language features that went along with her language expectation of summarizing and refining solutions, referencing scientific knowledge, evidence criteria through, and she selected labeling and describing diagrams, graphics, etc., statistics about a phenomenon, which is a perfect match, I think, for the class infographic. And so how did she support students with using the language features of labeling diagrams? Well, she co-constructed an anchor chart using Post-it notes with her class of why bacteria becomes resistant to antibiotics and how it happens. And so students worked in small groups. They recorded phrases that would describe the actual how antibiotics become resistant. And so these are ways to support your students' development of precise language. Okay, so all of these examples, these two examples that we've just talked about, really is all about making language visible to your students. That is the purpose of the WIDA standards framework, starting large with the 4 key language uses, and then how do those fit into the 5 content areas or the 5 WIDA standards, and then what are the language functions? What's the purpose of language that your students are using? And that's where you think about verbs, to describe, to justify, to analyze, to make a claim, and then getting very granular into those language features. A great way to teach those is mentor text, which you saw with Mr. Romero. He actually created the mentor text for his class in comparing the two stories with the same theme. Ms. Morrison co-constructed an anchor chart with her class. So here are some samples that I have for you for mentor text. And I want to read to you the most wonderful quote that came from the National Writing Project's definition of mentor text. It's just very powerful. Mentor texts are pieces of literature that you, both the teacher and the student, can return to and reread for many different purposes. They are texts to be studied and imitated. Mentor text helps students take risk and be different writers tomorrow than they are today. It helps them try out new strategies and formats. They should be texts that students can relate to and even read independently or with some support. And of course, as you already know, mentor texts don't just have to be in the form of a book. It can be a poem, a newspaper article, song lyrics, comic strips, manuals, essays, almost anything. Your district may also have repositories of mentor texts. Tell me in the chat box how you would go about finding a mentor text for a unit, or where do you find mentor text? Do you have a link you can give us, or can you tell us about it in the chat box? So let's take a moment and type into the chat box where you find mentor text. And you may use some of the examples that I already have in the slide. The Writing Thief is a great resource. Collaborate with the school librarian. Common Lit, ReadWorks, Discovery Ed. Awesome. Okay. Stacy, would you be willing to unmute and tell us about the Writing Thief? Ooh, Newsella, that is a great resource. Student sample work, absolutely. Our media center clerk, love it. Leveraging those resources.
Sure, I can unmute. So The Writing Thief it's just a book by Ruth Colham, and it has mentor text to teach the craft of writing. And you can actually search by the type of structure or style that you're trying to teach your students, and it recommends a portion of a particular text that you can use to teach that.
Nice. Thank you. From an English language arts teacher previously. And the Reach textbook. Yep, they've got great mentor text. Okay. All right. And so one thing I wanted to remind us of was Jack, our English language development teacher in the modules, had the most wonderful strategy for making language visible through guiding questions and pre-writes. And I want you just to take a moment and see how Jack used guiding questions and pre-writes to be able to pre-assess his students' writing to see where they are linguistically. So not only would you get information on their content, background knowledge, you can also analyze that pre-write with the guiding questions for where they are linguistically. And I thought it was an absolutely wonderful strategy. Another strategy for making language visible, we've talked about mentor text, we've talked about guiding questions and pre-writes, bringing caregivers in to focus on language in a newsletter, hosting parent coffee hours and sharing. We tend to forget how powerful this can be. And this is your parent educator, if you happen to have one in your district, is a powerful resource at our fingertips. And if you don't have a parent educator, the ESL teacher is often the greatest bridge and the strongest bond to our immigrant families. So I'd love to hear if you would like to unmute and share a success story of bringing in parents toward the end of developing student language. If anybody would like to share a success story with us, I'd love for you to unmute and share. And you can unmute
Can I
yourself.
come in?
Yes.
I use that to make a parent night. The students all had different activities that they presented either on their computers or they made posters, whatever, and they presented to each parent and to all the parents that came what they were doing. And that it showed the parent how they were progressing in the English language and what they were learning, and the outpouring of the parents coming in was phenomenal because they got really involved in wanting to see what kids were doing in the school.
I love it. Thank you. What a great idea. I hope you will take that back to your own district. Anybody else like to unmute and share?
Yes, this is Tim Bobe. We formed a partnership with a couple of our local daycares where a large population of our ESL students go to after school. And in this partnership, we made baskets with our sight words and focus words on rings. And so they work with those vocabulary words and sight words and high frequency words with the students at the after school care sites, which allows us to really hone in on some of the meaning of the vocabulary because they're able to hear the word, they're able to see a picture of the word on the card, and it just makes for a better partnership where we can work together in helping the students with their vocabulary.
That is a fantastic idea. I love that. Okay, anyone else? Okay. And I shared with you earlier today when I recapped the language unit that I previously taught, and I took it a step further and I identified the language features that I wanted to focus on. And so I want you to take a moment, Ivana, if you will put that link into the chat. Thank you. And I also have it up on the screen. And I simply did this for the second activity, which was explaining to a partner how the transfer of electricity works from the battery. And so you'll see that I selected this particular square describing observations and or evidence about a phenomenon through abstract nouns to introduce concepts, ideas, technical terms. So it made sense to me to construct a graphic organizer with the class. And you can see, look at the abstract nouns that we have to learn. Store of chemical energy is a battery. Transferring energy. And so simple ways to possibly teach that is simply through physical gestures, demoing with hand motions. If you want to store something, you're going to gather things in your arms off your desk and explain to the students that you are storing something, and then get them to demonstrate with the books in their desk or in their notebook and their pencil, whatever they can store and hold. Transferring, you could simply teach your students this by transferring a book from one partner to the other with the actual handoff, and partners actually doing the activity and sharing it in a sentence. And then you could demonstrate energy from examples and non-examples. With a picture of someone doing absolutely nothing and someone doing jumping jacks or running in place. So you get the idea that really it's pretty easy, I think, to hone in on which language feature would go along well with your unit based on the activity that you are doing and what you're seeing in terms of the language demands of your unit. So, keeping that in mind, get back to our PowerPoint. You have a choice board. You can do one of two things. You can continue work on the template that we started back on in Module 4 and we did at the beginning of our time together, where you'll go in after you've identified your language goals or your language expectations, get into the granular level, look at the little square bullets of language features, and then think about how you would teach that. And so you can either do that or you can go to the Jamboard. And that is a reflection on teaching language features. So I'm going to click on that now and let you take a look at it. And so we've got a couple of topics on the 3 frames that relate to language features. Maybe you think you need to brush up on your grammar and linguistics. It is WIDA's new standards framework is pretty heavy duty in that department. So what you'll do is click on a Post-it note and add your thoughts and reflections to that comment. The second frame, I'll need to teach my students parts of speech and or more complex aspects of grammar. How do you feel about that? And it may well depend on what grade band you're teaching. And then finally, what would the impact be of teaching language features embedded in a unit? So if you are a fast finisher, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. If you're a fast finisher and you have already, and you finish with adding language features to your unit template, and I'm going to click on that now. This was if you haven't started it yet, okay? But most of you have already started it, so you know where that is in your own drive. Ivana has dropped the Jamboard link into the chat box. And if you're a fast finisher, you can do both. We're going to take, I would say 5 minutes, and I will check in with you after 4 minutes. Do we need more time if you will type in the chat box? If you'll wrap up your typing, then I would like for us to take a couple minutes and read some of the Post-its on the Jamboard. And I want you to find a Post-it that really resonates with you and be prepared to share. It can be on any of the 3 frames. I will need to brush up on grammar and linguistics, or I will need to teach my students parts of speech or more complex aspects of grammar, or what will be the impact of teaching language features embedded in your unit. So we'll take a couple minutes and read the Post-its and then be prepared to share with one that particularly resonates with you, someone's response. And it could be your own if you like. I'm so engrossed in reading your responses. These are really fascinating. Okay. So I would love to have a volunteer to unmute and share. You can direct me as to which frame to go to.
If you could go to the second frame, Leonie. I like I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger because I'm so blind. Says we should model more complex sentence structures and expect our students to use them, and feedback on language and clear expectations are important. And I feel like sometimes we just expect our students to use those language, but then in the regular class setting, they're not given the opportunity to practice and use those language. And so this just stood out at me that we need to be intentional and incorporate those in our lessons to give them ample opportunities to learn it, model it, and then use it with each other.
Absolutely. Excellent. Someone else.
Hi. So, this is Teresa. So I was just agreeing with it that, you have to teach language embedded in with the curriculum because so much of the students, that I work with, when they write sentences, they really don't form a complete sentence in some cases. So I had to take it back down to like the sentence level to first teach them that before I got into more complex, writing and reading and taking things apart so they realize, what they're writing.
Absolutely. Okay. Yep.
And, WIDA says that their first language can be a tool for learning a second language, and we all know that as ESL teachers. But so many of the kids, they are not literate, or they may be speaking Spanish or Yemen or whatever. I have students from different countries, of course, but they may not actually read or write in their home language. So they can't really use that sometimes to form good English sentences. So we have to teach it like basics, very simple basic. And the one good thing about it is they usually latch onto it very quickly once you teach it to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to work
Absolutely.
teaching from second grade. And so I had spent a lot of time the last 4 years teaching grammar. So, it took them a long time, but where my middle school kids, they pretty much, can get it first, second time. So that's good.
That's very good. Yeah. And teaching those kids, once they get the basics down of stretching that sentence and adding those clauses for specificity, it's so important. And that I always use the actual physical gesture of how can we stretch that sentence. And you may have to prompt them. When did it happen? Okay, you've said that Juan helped his mother in the kitchen when she dropped her flour on the floor. Well, when did that happen? And so you coach them. But you're exactly right. They got to start with those basics, and then you can add on and stretch sentences. And absolutely, teaching it in context is imperative. I think teaching grammar in isolation is pretty yucky. It's certainly how I learned, and it's not that I didn't learn it, but it's certainly more meaningful, I think, in context, which is where mentor texts come in, and where you as a language teacher teach your students that focus on language so that they become metalinguistically aware. And so powerful, because other teachers are not doing that. They're focusing on content. primarily. And so it really, we are the purveyors of that meta-linguistic awareness, if you will. Someone else, send me to a frame. Which frame would you, did you see a Post-it that really resonated with you? Can you share the book title with us? The person, this Post-it, use a grammar book?
Hi, yeah, that was me. I was just saying that I used a basic, like elementary grammar as a basic for me to remember, because the question was, we need to brush up on our grammar. So it was like, sometimes I've forgotten those basic parts of speech and different things. So I just use that to remind myself of what the basics are. But, you know, that's all I was saying, is I just have something on hand to help me know when I come across like a sentence that has a adverbial clause or a noun phrase, because the students want to start sentences, but they don't have enough information. They may have all these words strung together and there's still just not even a verb in there. So they have to be taught what a verb is when we're working on our grammar.
Gotcha. Perfect. And yes,
And I'm going to jump in and say that we really need to work with the kids on learning connectors, so that you can connect events that you're reading in that mentor text. And through those connectors, you can really make students understand the sequence of events and all that. And at the same time, you're teaching them the grammar with the connectors of stretching out sentences, as you said.
exactly. Nice. Thank you. One
Um,
more
maybe.
person? Yeah.
Sorry, that's me, Sue. Sue Buckles. Hi. I just wanted to add, I was in the middle of typing and did not have enough time, but just to help my students kind of to have a chance to write and read in different sentence structure, I try to embed it into the linguistic frames that we use when we turn and talk to each other. So I might use something like, upon examining the charts in this text, or after reviewing the photographs and the captions, so knowing when to use that comma and to speak that way so they can write it in a similar way. So just to show them extra examples of it.
Excellent. Excellent. Great. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else before we head back to the slides? Okay. Okay. And so just for reflection on teaching language features. If you'll recall, I shared that you always want to start with the content area, and that's once I have in my head the content area, then I'm going to head to my WIDA Standards framework notebook or spiral bound book, and I am going to consider my learning activities and what key language use it would align to. And then I'm going to find my language expectations, which involve language functions, which is the purpose of language. And so, for example, in this particular one, the language function is describing. And then language features gets down into the nitty-gritty, granular aspects of language, such as abstract nouns, cohesion. How do you create cohesion? Relating verbs, you name it. And so you just simply, you're using your professional judgment as to where you want to direct your students' learning. You know what they're where they are linguistically, and so these language features get very specific. The language features are really designed more for ESL teachers, and your language expectations along with the language functions are more of an entry point, I think, for a content teacher. But at any rate, that is our thinking about language features and how we start at the broadest with our 5 standards and work our way down to the features. I thought that was a great graphic that Weta produced for language features. And so that is our short hour for today, where we were able to think about making language visible. And so I hope that you will think about leveraging your parents in making language visible. I love some of the examples that were shared today. How you can use mentor text to make language visible. And so that is it for Module 5. Don't forget to watch Module 6. Next Monday is our last coffee chat. And Ivana has got the link here to the archives if you missed previous coffee chats. Thank you for your input. If you'll share your unit template with me, I'll be glad to put some comments in if you would like. And I hope that that has given you just a little bit of practice in applying the new WETA standards framework to a unit or a lesson that you've already created. And so we
Oh, thank you. Whoop.
Yep.
You can't see me. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. What a good turnout tonight on a Monday after a holiday. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for all the work. Thank you, Lanny, for what you are doing with these coffee chats. So we look forward to seeing you guys for our last session. And if you have questions, keep sending them our way. I'm going to turn off the recording.
Thank